Living alone removes the noise and chaos of emotionally unstable relationships. Solitude becomes sacred, a place where your spirit sharpens, and divine wisdom replaces emotional confusion. When you're no longer seeking validation from a partner, you start receiving revelation from God. There's a kind of silence you can only experience when you're by yourself. No expectations, no one tugging at your emotions, no need to perform or please. And in that silence, you hear something most people never slow down long enough to recognize: God's voice. See, when you're in a relationship, especially one that's not aligned with your values or calling, your spiritual signal can get jammed. You're so busy decoding mixed messages, managing emotions, or trying to hold something together that's falling apart, that you can't even hear what you think anymore, let alone what God is trying to whisper to you. But when you live alone, you begin to realize that the quiet isn't empty, it's full, full of answers, full of clarity, full of presence. You start waking up without anxiety pressing on your chest. You sit with your coffee, and for the first time your mind isn't racing. You look around, and there's peace, not because life is perfect, but because the absence of unnecessary drama makes space for divine alignment. That stillness, that's where your soul starts breathing again. You begin to discern what's for you, and what was just a distraction dressed up as love. You're not reacting anymore. You're reflecting. You're not asking, how do I make this work? You're asking, is this even from God? And that shift changes everything. Sometimes God removes people from your life, not because they're bad, but because He's been trying to speak to you, and they've been too loud. Their energy, their trauma, their dysfunction, it's been drowning out the voice that's been gently nudging you toward purpose. And once you're finally alone, it's like spiritual static clears up, and you can hear that inner GPS saying, this is the way, walk in it. When you learn to be alone, you also learn to trust your discernment. You're not desperate for signs anymore. You start noticing how peace feels more powerful than chemistry. You stop chasing people who don't see you, and instead you start walking with the one who's always seen you, even in your most broken moments. And he starts showing you who you are, without the mirrors of relationships that distorted your reflection. Living alone doesn't mean being lonely. It means being aligned. It means you're no longer trying to squeeze into spaces you were never meant to fit in. You're not waiting to be chosen, you already are chosen. And in that sacred space, you realize you're not missing anything. You're just being prepared for everything that's meant for you. And that kind of clarity, that only comes when you're quiet enough to finally hear the whisper that says, I've been here all along. There is a moment in your life when you finally realize nobody is coming to save you emotionally. And it's not a bitter realization. It's a powerful one. Because from that moment on, you stop handing out the keys to your peace. You stop letting other people decide how your day goes, how your mood shifts, and whether or not you feel seen. That right there is the beginning of emotional sovereignty. Living alone has a way of confronting you with yourself. There's no one to blame, no one to distract you, and no one to manage. It's just you, your thoughts, your wounds, and your truth. And instead of running from them, you finally sit down with them. You learn how to hold space for yourself. You learn how to feel without spiraling, to process without projecting, and to cry without needing someone to fix it. You begin to understand that emotional maturity isn't about being stoic. It's about being stable. When you're emotionally sovereign, you're no longer controlled by someone else's silence or attention. Their bad day doesn't become your storm. Their distance doesn't trigger your abandonment. You don't chase, you don't beg, and you don't compromise your dignity just to avoid being alone. Because guess what? You've already been alone, and you discovered how capable, whole, and grounded you really are. And it's not that you don't feel anymore. You feel asterisk, deeply asterisk. But your emotions no longer run your life. They inform you, not enslave you. You've done the work. You've healed the parts of you that used to cling, that used to panic when someone pulled away, that used to shrink just to keep the peace. Now you asterisk are asterisk the peace. You understand your triggers, you've unpacked your patterns, and you've created boundaries not to keep people out, but to keep yourself intact. That's the kind of strength that solitude builds. It teaches you how to anchor yourself so deeply that even when life gets messy, asterisk, you don't unravel asterisk. And here's the beautiful part: when you reach this level of emotional self-leadership, you don't walk into relationships looking to be rescued or completed. You walk in whole. You no longer ask, will they stay? Instead, you ask, do they add to the peace I already have? And if they don't, you walk away. Not because you're heartless, but because you're finally heart-wise. So many people are addicted to emotional chaos because they've never tasted the safety that comes from within. But once you've experienced that kind of inner stability, you stop letting other people's dysfunction dictate your direction. You are no longer available for emotional turbulence disguised as love, because now you sit on the throne of your own soul, and no one else gets to rule there. There comes a point where you look around and realize you've been shrinking just to fit inside someone else's idea of love. You've been dimming your light, softening your standards, and holding your breath, just to keep a relationship alive that's already suffocating your spirit. And when you finally step into solitude, you feel it, the release, the relief, the truth. Asterisk, you were never meant to settle there, asterisk. You were meant to asterisk, become asterisk, something greater. Living alone strips away the illusion that your worth is tied to being chosen. You stop confusing consistency with compatibility. You begin to see that just because someone wants you around doesn't mean they're worthy of your soul. And that clarity, it only comes when you remove yourself from relationships that demand your loyalty but drain your essence. When you're alone, you stop bargaining with your value. You start asking deeper questions. Who am I becoming in this relationship? Am I evolving or am I eroding? Is this love growing me, or is it keeping me in survival mode? You stop seeing solitude as punishment and start seeing it as preparation. You start becoming a person who honors your intuition more than anyone's opinion. And something beautiful happens. You start raising your standards, not out of arrogance, but out of awareness. You realize that the version of you that was settling was operating from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of not being enough. But now you're rooted in self-respect. You're not waiting for someone to see your worth. You see it. You live it. You breathe it. You stop tolerating almosts, maybes, and someday I'll change. You begin to protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. You don't entertain confusion anymore, because your spirit finally knows what clarity feels like. You don't go back to what broke you just because it's familiar. You know too much now. You've felt the difference between love that elevates and love that exhausts. And no, it's not easy. Growth is uncomfortable. You'll have moments where you miss the noise, the touch, the idea of what you thought it could be. But then you remember, peace doesn't beg, love doesn't hurt, and your soul doesn't have to scream to be heard. You start becoming the kind of person you used to hope someone else would be. You become faithful to your boundaries, committed to your growth, loyal to your healing. And that shift, it rewrites your entire story. You go from settling for connection to standing in conviction. Because once you taste what it's like to live in truth, you'll never go back to surviving in someone else's lie. There's a divine assignment on your life, but sometimes the noise of a relationship, especially one that's not in alignment, can make you forget why you're even here. You wake up every day wrapped in someone else's emotional roller coaster, and slowly, without even realizing it, you start abandoning your mission to manage their mood. Your dreams get quieter, your purpose gets blurry, and you begin to shrink not because you're weak, but because you're distracted. When you step into solitude, that fog begins to clear. You start remembering the goals you had before they entered your life. You recall the vision you once carried with fire before it got smothered under compromise, and the beautiful thing about being alone. You finally have the space to come back home to yourself. Living alone teaches you that your life is not just about companionship, it's about calling. And when there's no one around to impress, to chase, or to appease, you realize how much energy you were pouring into keeping things alive that were never meant to last. Now, that energy gets redirected into purpose, into creation, into becoming the fullest version of who you were always meant to be. You start writing again, you start dreaming again, you start serving, building, showing up for your community, your craft, your creator. Not because someone is watching, but because your soul finally feels free enough to move. You're no longer tiptoeing around someone else's insecurities. You're dancing in alignment with your destiny. And in that space, you begin to hear something louder than fear. Conviction. You start asking bigger questions. What was I born to do? Who am I when no one's expecting anything from me? What legacy am I leaving behind? And when you ask those questions, you stop settling for temporary validation and start pursuing eternal impact. The truth is, many people lose their mission the moment they enter a relationship because they believe love requires sacrificing themselves. But real love never asks you to abandon your calling. If anything, it should amplify it. But before someone can run with you in purpose, you have to first remember where you're going . And solitude gives you that roadmap back. When you live alone and reconnect with your mission, you stop being impressed by shallow attention and start being intentional with your time. You stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing the work you were put here to do. You stop looking for someone to complete you, because now you're being completed by calling not company. And when you live from that place anchored in vision, rooted in clarity, you're no longer led by emotion. You're led by mission. At some point, you realize that what you thought was love was really just codependency wearing a disguise. It wasn't connection. It was attachment. It wasn't partnership. It was emotional survival. And when you live alone, when you sit in the stillness long enough, you finally come face with the patterns you used to blame on other people. The truth, it wasn't always them. Sometimes it was your own unhealed need to be needed. You see, codependency doesn't just show up as clinginess. It hides in overgiving, in losing yourself, in tying yourself worth to how someone else responds to you. It shows up in the way you ignore your boundaries just to keep the peace, the way you tolerate mistreatment just so you won't feel abandoned. And for a while it feels noble, sacrificial even. But eventually you wake up empty, resentful, and exhausted. Because you were never designed to carry someone else's healing on your back. That's why solitude is a gift. It detoxes you from that need to be needed. It teaches you that your value isn't rooted in how much pain you can absorb. You stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. You start recognizing peace as your new standard. And in that process, you break the addiction to dysfunctional connection. Living alone becomes your recovery. You start to unlearn the belief that love must be earned. You stop performing. You stop chasing. You stop believing that your presence has to be justified by your usefulness. You start loving yourself without a job to do or a role to play in someone else's broken story. And that shift is powerful, because once you break free from codependency, you become emotionally dangerous, not in a harmful way, but in a way that says, asterisk, you can't manipulate me with guilt anymore. Asterisk, you can't bait me with silence, humility, and trust. I know the difference between love and emotional bondage. You start choosing relationships that are rooted in mutual respect, not desperation. You value connection, but you don't need it to function. You can love someone fully while still letting them be responsible for their own healing. That is strength. That is wholeness. That is freedom. And when you walk into a room with that kind of energy, when you no longer need saving, fixing, or proving, you disrupt every pattern that once held you hostage. You're no longer looking for a rescuer because you've become your own refuge. You're no longer drawn to chaos because peace has become your new home. That's when you know you've turned the corner. That's when you become a weapon not of destruction, but of discernment. A weapon against settling. A weapon against soul, fracturing relationships. A weapon against anything that asks you to abandon yourself in the name of love. There's a kind of love that's born from hunger, from emptiness, from lack. It clings, it begs, it overextends. It doesn't feel like love. It feels like survival dressed up as affection. And for a long time, that's what many of us thought love was supposed to look like. We gave too much too soon. We accepted too little too long. We poured and poured, hoping someone would notice we were running on empty. But when you start living alone, when you finally sit with yourself long enough to understand your own patterns, you begin to see that real love doesn't come from depletion. It comes from overflow. And the only way to get there is by healing the places in you that once believed love was something you had to earn. You begin to fill your own cup, not with distractions, not with attention, but with alignment, with stillness, with spiritual connection. You start nurturing your mind, your body, your soul, not for anyone else's approval, but because you finally realize how worthy you are of your own care. You learn how to enjoy your own company, how to self-soothe, how to validate your own emotions, and slowly the need to be needed dissolves. The fear of being alone loses its grip. You are no longer looking to love someone just so you won't feel forgotten. You love because you're already full. And from that place, love becomes different. You stop tolerating one-sided relationships. You no longer chase people who are emotionally unavailable. You no longer confuse attention with affection, because now you're not trying to be chosen. You're choosing yourself first, and that asterisk sets the tone for everyone else. You stop asking, will they love me? And start asking, does this align with the love I already have for myself? That shift changes everything. You don't overgive just to feel safe. You don't stay silent just to keep someone close. You don't abandon your needs just to be seen. You love with boundaries now, with wisdom, with discernment, and most importantly, with a sense of completeness. You can be soft without being naive. You can be kind without being taken advantage of, because your love is no longer a plea. It's a gift. And it's not about being closed off. It's about being so rooted in your own peace, your own joy, your own worth, that anyone who enters your life becomes a part of the overflow, not the source. You give from abundance, not scarcity, from confidence, not desperation, from wholeness, not wounds. And once you start loving from overflow, You'll never again settle for the kind of love that empties you.